Coverage of that event courtesy of television station KUSA and the Rocky Mountain News, both in Denver. Tonight's debate features former California Governor Jerry Brown, Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton, Iowa Senator Tom Harkin, Nebraska Senator Bob Kerrey, and former Massachusetts Senator Paul Tsongas. Colorado has more than 530,000 registered Democratic voters. 47 pledged delegates are scheduled to attend the National Convention this summer in New York City. In the 1988 presidential election as a whole, the state went with George Bush. He defeated Michael Dukakis there 53 to 45%. More than half of Colorado is farmland. Nearly 60% of its workforce is considered white-collar. Nearly 9 of 10 people are white, and 80% of the population overall live in urban areas. Colorado, Georgia, and Maryland will also hold presidential primaries this Tuesday. The state of Idaho will hold Democratic caucuses that day. We invite you to stay with C-SPAN for further Election 92 coverage. After this debate, we will follow President Bush and Patrick Buchanan on the campaign trail. Earlier today, Mr. Bush attended a rally sponsored by the Georgia Republican Party. And following the president's speech, we will stay in Atlanta for coverage of an address by his GOP challenger, Patrick Buchanan. Yesterday, Mr. Buchanan spoke before the Georgia State Senate. After President Bush and Patrick Buchanan, we will take you to the campaign trail for Democrats Tom Harkin and Bob Kerrey as they will be making appearances. And once again, we'd like to remind you of 2 debates to be held Sunday at 6:55 p.m. Eastern Time. We will present a Democratic debate from Georgia, and at 9:35, it's a Democratic Candidates Forum from Maryland. We take you now to Denver, Colorado for tonight's Democratic Presidential Forum.
The Auditorium Theater opened in Denver more than 80 years ago. Its first major event, the Democratic National Convention. This old building, like Colorado itself, has a long and colorful history when it comes to choosing presidents. But for years, Colorado has been virtually ignored by the nation because we had a caucus system held late on the political calendar. But things are different now. The first Colorado primary comes after New Hampshire and just before Super Tuesday. It's now a yardstick to measure the candidates who want to be president. And the nation is watching. So it's fitting that the Democrats return to the Auditorium Theater in the year of Colorado's first primary. This time for a forum. Candidates talking about their ideas, their hopes, their dreams, and their plans for the nation. Talking about why they want to be president.
KUSA TV and the Rocky Mountain News, in cooperation with the Colorado Democratic Party, are proud to present the 1992 Colorado Democratic Presidential Forum. Please welcome our moderator, 9 News anchorman, Ed Sardella.
Good evening and welcome to our forum. Our goal for the next 90 minutes is to allow all of you to get to know the major Democratic candidates for president, what they stand for, their vision for the future, and how each plans to lead our government and our country if he is elected president. To open our forum, here is the chairman of the Colorado Democratic Party, Howard Gelt.
Thank you. Colorado has always been a leader in cutting-edge issues, from women's and minority rights to environmental protection. Colorado is proud to be the first in the West to test our Democratic presidential candidates. Please enjoy this first ever Colorado Presidential Forum.
Thanks, Mr. Gelt. Our forum is divided into 3 parts of about 30 minutes each. Each segment will have a panel of 2 people asking the candidates questions. So we'll have 6 questioners in all. 2 of them will be citizen panelists. They've been selected from a large number of applicants. Our citizen panelists will ask 1 question each. I will serve as the moderator. My job is to keep order, to try to keep the peace, and I may ask a question from time to time. Let's meet the candidates. They are seated in an order that was determined by a drawing last night. First, former Senator Paul Tsongas of Massachusetts. Senator Tom Harkin of Iowa. Former Governor Jerry Brown of California. Governor Bill Clinton of Arkansas. And Senator Bob Kerrey of Nebraska. We are striving for maximum discussion with minimum rules. We have asked our candidates to limit their responses to 1.5 minutes maximum. We will allow follow-up questions, and we will allow some interruptions and some exchanges, so long as they are short and to the point. My job as moderator will be to try to balance the discussion and provide for equal time, but we are placing some responsibility for that on the candidates themselves. They have been involved in other debates with a similar format, and they have shown a keen interest in being able to look out for themselves. Our first panel, the editor of the Rocky Mountain News, Jay Ambrose, and our first citizen panelist, Terry Taylor, a state employee from Denver. The first question from Jay Ambrose to Paul Tsongas.
Senator Tsongas, I assume you're not a fan of President Reagan's, but even his harshest critics grant that he hewed to certain core principles in his administration, and that these gave shape and definition to his administration and a certain coherence. And he could sum these up in a matter of a few sentences. I'm wondering if you could tell us and the other candidates as well, if you could say in a few simple sentences what the heart of your administration would be if you're elected president.
Well, from my point of view, the ultimate responsibility of a president and the Congress is to take this world that has been given to us, this country, given to us by our ancestors, and make it whole and viable, to have an economy that provides jobs for people, an environment that is held sacred, and a capacity to heal, provide women's rights and human rights and civil rights, and through conviction and beliefs, take that core and hand it over to our children when their time comes intact. So my view and my policies have one fundamental basis. What is generationally responsible? What can we do in this guardianship of our time to make this a better nation and a better world so that we can hand it over to our children with a sense of sacredness that we have fulfilled that mandate?
Senator Harkin.
When I was a young kid, my father told me, he said, the best social program is a good job. I've always believed that, and I still believe that, and I think that's the responsibility of government to make sure that we have that in this country, and as president, that's what I do. First and foremost, get this country back to work again, provide good jobs to people. Not the dead-end minimum wage jobs of Reagan and Bush, but a good job where a person can work and make enough money to raise their kids, feed and clothe them, educate them, buy a home, buy a car, take a nice vacation, retire in dignity with good health care. That's not too much to ask for America. Secondly, we need a president that understands you have to leave the ladder of opportunity down there for all people to climb. That those at the bottom also ought to have a chance at the American dream. Leave that ladder of opportunity down. Don't let people pull it up behind you. That's the difference between me and Bush. He'll say, climb the ladder of success. When you get to the top, pull it up after you. I say, we're going to make sure you leave it down there for others. And the third thing as president is to bring our people together, not divide people up, but to bring people together, bring people in, allow people to contribute. That's why I was so proud of the Americans with Disabilities Act that I authored and pushed through Congress, because it breaks down barriers, it opens doors, it allows people to come in and contribute to their fullest extent. And as president, I will speak out against any acts of racism, sexism, homophobia, or anti-Semitism anytime it occurs in America.
Thanks, Senator. Governor Brown.
201 years ago, Thomas Jefferson set forth the guiding ideal of the Democratic Party which he founded, and that is to stop the power of the few from rioting on the labors of the many. Politics today is corrupted. It's dominated by political action committees, by $1,000 contributors, their friends, and those who can bundle those huge sums of money. My first core principle is to reform the corrupt politics and bring the American people back into their own democracy, take back their government. Secondly, and it flows from the first, reform the tax code. 4,000 words, 4,000 pages of loopholes and disincentives. I want to strip all that away and create a single 13% rate on individuals and on business value added. Third, I see the connection between energy, environment, and economy. Phase out nuclear power, create a sustainable energy program, and eliminate the 50% of absolute waste that we now see in our energy system. And that's the source of the jobs, the sustainability, and a real environmental program. And finally, healthcare. Reform healthcare. Make sure we have an overall limit, a single payer system, so that every single American can be covered. If we take care of just these four things, the politics, the energy, the taxes, and the healthcare, we'll have a country that works for all of us.
Governor Clinton.
The purpose of politics in our country in every age and time is to make sure that every man and woman can live up to the fullest of their God-given potential and to pass on a better world to our children. In this time, what that means is helping the American people to deal with the enormous change which is sweeping over us. Our country is going in the wrong direction. The economy is going downhill. The society is coming apart. There are some major things we have to do. First of all, a comprehensive economic strategy to build a high-opportunity, high-wage, high-growth society with a beginning and an investment in people, in their education and training, their health care, and their human development. Put people first. Secondly, empower people. Don't weigh them down with big bureaucracies. Give an earned income tax credit to the working poor. Help people on welfare liberate themselves and go to work. Help working mothers with child support and family leave and child care and uniform child support enforcement around the country. Empowerment. Thirdly, have a business climate which gives incentives for people to invest in our country, in our jobs, our goods, and our service, but stop the 80s policy of giving people something for nothing. Revoke the tax incentives for moving jobs overseas. Revoke tax incentives for unwarranted, exorbitant executive compensation unrelated to performance. And finally, bring this country together again. We have got to put aside the selfish and mindless ethic of the 80s and bridge the racial and gender and regional gaps to pull this country together again. We can win again as a nation if we can be one again.
Thanks, Governor. Senator Kerry.
Well, first of all, the problem with Ronald Reagan is that no matter what question you ask him, he'd answer the same thing. If you said, what time is it? He'd say lower taxes, higher defense, and smaller government. I mean, he couldn't see what was going on in the country. I mean, he didn't have the eyes to be able to know that the American people were afraid of much more than just communism. Ronald Reagan was willing to fight for freedom all over this planet, but he wouldn't fight for freedom here in America. Now, I intend as President of the United States to fight against a right-wing Supreme Court that seems determined to take away all of our freedoms. I intend to fight to make sure that we begin now this massive and difficult conversion from an economy that has the capacity to produce weapons that the world fears to an economy that has the capacity to produce the goods and services that people want to purchase. That conversion must begin today, and it must begin with national health insurance so that we say to every single American, you will not lose your health care if you lose your job. Now, I intend to make sure that further that we fight to make certain that we add value to each and every one of our children beginning at as early as possible age so that they've got real freedom. Freedom from fear of disease, freedom from fear of malnutrition, freedom from fear that they won't get the education that they need. If we start early with our babies, we will build the strongest economy on earth and we'll build the best society on earth as well.
Thanks, Senator Kerry. Let me again admonish our audience, we're not counting interruptions for applause today, so the time is coming off your candidates, and we'd appreciate it if you'd refrain from applause, please. Mr. Ambrose.
Senator Harkin, Senator Kerry used the expression right-wing Supreme Court, but should we really be, the next president's going to have a chance to nominate maybe 2 or 3 Supreme Court justices, could really shape the court, but should the president think in terms of political outcomes, political philosophy? Shouldn't we be thinking in terms of some judicial philosophy, such as original intent or precedent or text or something like that? Should there be some criteria of judicial philosophy as well as political philosophy?
I think the 3 criteria that I would use in nominating a Supreme Court justice would be: 1, do they have a good background in judicial experience? Have they been a lawyer trying constitutional law cases? Or secondly, have they taught in law school constitutional law? Or do they have a distinguished background as a jurist? First of all, those are sort of the threshold items. Secondly, I would want to know what that person thought about certain concepts of an evolving Constitution in the United States. Obviously, the Constitution has to evolve and grow as we evolve and grow, like the right of privacy, for example. I would want to know, for any nominee that I would nominate, what their concept is in the Constitution of a right to privacy for American citizens. I can tell you right now, I would never nominate anyone to the Supreme Court who believed that the government had the right to dictate to any woman in America her freedom of choice.
Where do you see the right of privacy in the Constitution?
The right of privacy is sort of subsumed within the Bill of Rights.
It's not stated, though, is it?
Well, it's just like this. You see, it says there's illegal searches and seizures in the Constitution, right? But telephones weren't invented at that time. Later on, when people started tapping people's phones, the police started tapping their phones, well, they took them to court on that. Well, there wasn't anything in the Constitution that said the police couldn't tap your phones, but the Justice of the Supreme Court said that's just like an illegal search and seizure. So as technology evolves, as our country evolves, we do have to take the intent of the framers, but adapt it to modern times. And that's why I say the intent of the framers was a right of privacy. And one of the most inherent rights of privacy is for a person to have control over his or her own body, especially in the case of women in this country.
Governor Brown.
Well, I've appointed 7 justices to the Supreme Court of California, and all 7, when given the chance, voted to uphold the right of privacy, specifically as it affects the right to choice in the case of an abortion. Beyond that, though, let's look at the giants. Justice Harlan, Justice Frankfurter, Justice Black, and Justice Douglas. I mean, these were giants, and that's what we should be looking for. People whose wisdom, whose experience, whose craftsmanship, or maybe we call it craftspersonship at this point, can commend itself and will generate that kind of respect that we need. Right now, we have a right-wing court. I opposed Clarence Thomas because he was another in a long line of suppliant agents of the executive. We have a government, in the name of very conservative rhetoric, is becoming the most invasive, centralized state that the United States of America has ever seen. I want judges who will be independent, who will be wise, and who, through their craft, will earn the respect on which the Supreme Court, which has neither the purse nor the sword, ultimately depends. So I don't even think you're going to get to, by the time Bush gets finished, we'll be lucky to have any appointments. And therefore, besides the Supreme Court, we better start committing ourselves to the right kind of economic and social philosophy through Congress to protect the American liberties which are daily being eroded in this country.
Governor Clinton, before you begin your answer, could I ask, if we are going to believe that rights are subsumed by other rights, what are the restraints on justices? And if there are no restraints, can't this be as much a problem with the right wing as it is with more liberal justices?
Well, of course, it's interesting now that some of the very conservative and highly political people on the court and those who wanted to go to the court are making arguments today for a wide berth in decision-making that they once made against more liberal courts. But let me say there will never be any certain answers to that. No one knows what the original intent of the founders were. Mr. Bork foundered in his hearings before the Senate because he had very strained and highly literalistic theories that in the end seemed too designed to get to a particular political result. I agree with Governor Brown. I think you want large-minded women and men considered for the court, people of great intelligence and great character, people of wide learning and great experience, and people who are truly wise. All of us, even if we denied it, would want to have some feel for how the justices would proceed on certain fronts. And I think after the relentless attempt of the last 12 years to try to push this court to the right and restrict the Bill of Rights in its ability to restrain governments reaching in to the personal lives of citizens, I know that I would feel very reluctant to put anybody on that court that I didn't believe had a very wide philosophy of the Bill of Rights, including a determination to protect the right of privacy. I used to teach constitutional law, and that's just the way I feel about it.
Senator Kerry.
Since I started this, I mean, look, this is an administration that wants to get in our bedroom before they want to give us a house. I mean, the problem that I had, for example, with Clarence Thomas, notwithstanding the fact that I believed in Anita Hill and not him, the problem that I've got was that this isn't an outstanding jurist. I mean, belief is important. And it is important to have somebody with strong beliefs. And what I dislike is this very activist court, by the way, left or right, that goes out there and starts disrupting established precedent. Because what we need to do is focus this government's attention on beginning the task of putting Americans back to work. This world has changed, and we have an historic opportunity. I don't think there's been a generation given an opportunity like this. Not just to accept the world as it's been passed on to us, but to change this world with our own efforts. And we've got to begin right now to do that. I don't want a Supreme Court that's disturbing things. I want to be able to answer the question that 8,000 families have at Rocky Flats here in Colorado that are producing a wonderful product. Unfortunately, it's a plutonium trigger. And I don't have to tell folks that there isn't much demand for plutonium triggers. You don't go down to the store and say, I'll be right back, I'm going to go buy a plutonium trigger. We need to begin to manufacture, with government assistance, manufacture those things that the world wants to purchase. We can have a consumer electronics industry. Now, we can have those industries that, in fact, create the high-paying jobs that I believe Americans want.
Thanks, Senator. Senator Tsongas.
Well, the standard for a Supreme Court nominee is excellence. That may come as news to George Bush, but that's the standard. In my view of the Supreme Court, it has to be the stabilizer of our nation. And to use a metaphor, if I can, it's like an airplane. You have a right wing and a left wing, and most of it is in the middle. So it flies. What did Reagan Bush give us? Airplanes with all these right wings. It can't fly, and it's unstable. What we need is a Supreme Court that reflects America and is a stabilizing agent. And let me say on the issue of choice, I would not nominate a Supreme Court nominee who is not resolute in his or her commitment to choice. I'm the only candidate here who has been pro-choice forever, who's never made an anti-choice statement, who's never taken an anti-choice position, and has never attempted to limit the access to choice by women, and I'm extremely proud of that record.
Can I interject one thing? Not about the choice issue, but the role of the Supreme Court is not always to stabilize America. The role of the Supreme Court is to protect the fabric of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and it should be a stabilizing force in most cases, but it has at times been a radical force in our country because it stood up for the rights of ordinary people when they were being abused by government, and they had to be protected. And I think that's a very important point to make. It is not always a middle-of-the-road force. Sometimes it has to take the unpopular position to protect the little citizens of the country against the big government. That's what it was set up to do.
Okay. It's time to go to our...
I want to just correct a point.
Quickly, if you would.
Senator Tsongas gave an impression that he was somehow more pro-choice than the rest of the world. I was governor of California, and for 8 years, well, 6 of those 8 years, the legislature attempted to restrict the right of a woman, particularly poor women, to make the choice of their conscience. And not only did I strip away that language, but the Supreme Court, the majority of judges who I appointed, overturned the legislative attempts. Now, that's not rhetoric, that's reality in official government action.
Could I respond?
It's time for our citizen question, and let us go to Terry Taylor, a resident of Denver, please.
Thank you. Governor Brown and all the candidates, and from your comments already, I can tell that you are going to use a standard of excellence to appoint people, and especially to your cabinet. And since there are many excellent women available to serve at the cabinet level, and since women make up the majority of the voting population and should have equal leadership roles in your cabinet, if elected, will you smash the glass ceiling and guarantee that half of your appointments will be women? And if not, why not?
Governor Brown, you're first.
Well, since I've already done that, I have no difficulty in making that commitment. And I believe that the most underused resource in this country are the women of this country. And during the tenure in California, where I was privileged to serve as the chief executive, I appointed women not just to symbolic jobs, but women to head the Highway Department, the Men's Prisons, the Veteran Affairs Department, the Business and Transportation Department, the Department of Finance, the Department of Health, the Department of Agriculture and Services, and I appointed 131 women as judges. There is no executive in this country, before or since, who has a record like that, and I would carry it to Washington when I become the next president.
Governor Clinton?
In 1987, I was recognized by the National Women's Political Caucus for being one of the top governors in the country and the percentage of women in high positions in my government. I wouldn't restrict myself to just having half the cabinet be women. I might want more. But frankly, I also believe that if we have records here, oh, wait a minute, I'm being serious. Why are you laughing about that? If we have records, I think it is not appropriate to say if there are 14, I'll be sure there are 7. I don't believe in that. But I do believe, so I'm not going to say half, but I'll say this. I wouldn't restrict myself to half. Women have held most of the important positions in my administration. I've been raised by a working grandmother, a working mother. Women's issues have been at the forefront of everything that I have done. Half the people in the country now think that I ought to begin by putting my wife in the cabinet. And I wouldn't restrict myself just to 50%.
Senator Kerry?
Well, let me be fairly direct on this thing. I've acted affirmatively as governor and as senator to hire, but I don't believe in quotas. I don't believe in imposing and adhering to an artificial quota. I just don't. I think it's unfair. And the comment that Governor Clinton made is not a humorous one. It may be that the decision is that we hire more than 50%. In particular, let me point out something that I think is awfully crucial in this, again, in this new era, this uncharted waters beyond the Cold War. One of the things that I'm going to consider is bringing a woman in to run the Department of State, to run the Department of Defense. I mean, we need to look at this world differently than we have in the past, much differently than we have in the past. And if we do, if we look at the world differently than we have in the past, it is just possible that the United States of America will be able to achieve this elusive goal of world peace and global prosperity. I tell you, I understand in this Democratic primary how interested and how intense the interest is in creating jobs in America and dealing with the American economy. And I know that the second 30 minutes is going to be devoted to foreign policy. But I'm telling you that world prosperity and world peace is in our interest. It means jobs for Americans and opportunities for America. And our opportunity in this world is much larger today now that this old war with the Soviet Union has ended. And it seems to me that women in the administration could perhaps bring just the view we need to be able to dream the dream of a new world.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Tsongas.
Let me congratulate you on the question. You have set a standard. I think it's very important, and I applaud you for what you've done. Let me, if I may, as preface, say to Governor Brown, I did not question your record as governor. That what I was pointing out is when you came back from India, you made statements about abortion, saying abortion was crazy. So my point...
You know what I said, Paul? I said that the fact that 50 million abortions take place in the world is rather crazy. And I personally have severe moral questions about this. But as a public official, I respect an iron wall of separation of the privacy of a woman and the activities of the government. I don't want politicians telling women what to do.
Well, the point I was trying to make is I don't have to explain away any statement that I've made in the past. All right? The second point, my cabinet must reflect America. It's not only women, but minorities. We have to heal this nation. George Bush divided us so he could rule us. We have to unite this country to heal it. And when they look at my cabinet, they're going to see America. And it's all its greatness. And everyone's in, nobody's out. We have to be committed to that. And the other point I would make is that when the women's groups in New Hampshire got together to endorse a candidate, I was that candidate. So I've been endorsed by environmental groups in New Hampshire and in Maryland, and by the women's groups in New Hampshire. I have a record. It's not rhetoric. I haven't manufactured anything. And that's why these independent groups have come over to support me because of what I've done over the many years.
Senator Harkin.
Well, perhaps I should nominate my wife, the Attorney General. My wife, Ruth Harkin, was the first Democrat elected Story County attorney in Iowa. and set the standard in Iowa for going after men that weren't paying their child support by going after them, even if they were out of state, bringing them back and putting them in jail until they agreed to pay their child support. Now, maybe that's the kind of person we need as Attorney General of the United States. Secondly, I've always prided myself in the fact that my top people in my office were women. My administrative assistants are women, and my press secretaries are women. 2 of the top 3 people in my office are women. On the cabinet, I can answer that by saying yes, it could be more than that. But there's 2 other things I think that we've all kind of missed here in our answers. I would use my position as President of the United States and as leader of the Democratic Party to go out and find women to run for office in this country. At the local, state level, for the United States Senate, it's a crime we only have 2 women in the United States Senate. As President, I would go out and find the women to run for the United States Senate and the United States House, get more women in those positions, and use my position as head of the party to do that. The second thing I would do is I would use the presidency as a bully pulpit to go after corporate America and break the glass ceiling in corporate America and get women into the boardrooms of corporate America. That's where we have to make the advances in America. Get women in these boardrooms.
Can I make a brief interjection since
Please,
I didn't use
very
anything
quickly,
like
if you
all my
would.
time? The glass ceiling involves more than the cabinet. President influences the appointment of hundreds of people. And I think we ought to make a commitment, and I think we all share it, but I think it's really worth pointing out that you've got the sub-cabinet positions, the undersecretaries, the assistant secretaries, people running all these agencies all across the country at the state levels. And if you look at it, the opportunities for appointing women and for making a statement that then gives us the leverage to go to the private sector to try to break through that glass ceiling is enormous. And I think we ought to keep that in mind. It is more than the cabinet, much, much more that we can do, and we must.
We need to take a break. Our thanks to our panelists, and we'll be right back in just a minute.
We're breaking away for a moment from this Democratic presidential candidates debate, which is coming to you tonight from Denver, Colorado. This coverage is coming to you courtesy of television station KUSA Channel 9 and the Rocky Mountain News, both in Denver. Tonight, C-SPAN is bringing you this event as it is being shown by Channel 9 to its audience in Denver, Colorado. And while the station is showing its audience some commercials, we will tell you what's happening tonight here on C-SPAN. Immediately following this event, at 11:05 p.m. Eastern Time, we will take you to Georgia for coverage of campaign visits by President Bush and his GOP challenger, Patrick Buchanan. After that, we will follow Democrats Tom Harkin and Bob Kerrey on the campaign trail. Now turning to our Election 92 coverage Sunday evening, at 6:55 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow, it's coverage of a debate from Georgia featuring the leading Democratic White House hopefuls. And at 9:35 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow night, Road to the White House will feature a Maryland forum once again among the Democratic contenders. Colorado, Georgia, and Maryland all hold their presidential primaries this Tuesday. The event we're watching tonight is being shown for the more than 530,000 registered Democratic voters in Colorado. They will be going to the polls on Tuesday in that state's presidential primary. 47 pledged delegates will go from Colorado to attend the Democratic National Convention this summer. In just a few moments, we'll be joining KUSE-TV Channel 9 in Denver, Colorado in this 1992 Democratic Presidential Candidates Forum. This event is also being sponsored by the Rocky Mountain News in Denver, Colorado. We're going to take you now to Denver's Auditorium Theater.
Our second half hour of our Colorado Democratic Candidates Forum. Here is our second panel of questioners, Vincent Carroll, the editor of the editorial page of the Rocky Mountain News, And our second citizen panelist, Heidi Hagenbu, an 8th grader from Clear Lake Middle School in Westminster. The first question from Vincent Carroll for Governor Bill Clinton.
Let's turn to foreign policy and trade issues for a moment, Governor. Do you think the United States should pressure Israel to stop its settlement to the occupied territories? And if so, do you support the Bush administration's attempt to link aid to Israel with the cessation of those settlements?
Well, the United States has always had a position that the settlements in the occupied territories were an obstacle to peace. That is our clear position. Israel was willing to negotiate an agreement in which the loan guarantees could be guaranteed in terms that would guarantee that that money at least wouldn't be used for the settlements. What concerns me about the way this issue is developed is that we had a 20-year commitment to helping to relocate the Jews from the former Soviet Union. We have a 40,000 import limit or immigration limit in this country. We had our words on the line, and after the Gulf War, when Israel was very strong and popular, they basically were willing to forego the opportunity to ask then for the loan guarantee for this delay. Now, what I think has to be done is some agreement needs to be made between the United States and Israel that permits them to absorb all these people that are coming into their country in ways that does not aggravate the settlement issue. But in the end, the settlement issue needs to be decided between Israel and the Arabs at the peace table. And I think every time the American government makes a public statement that only takes on Israel and never says anything about the Arab states, we look like we're being unbalanced. Let me just I know I'm about out of time. Let me give you one example. We agreed to condemn Israel for expelling 4 alleged terrorists from Israel in language more strong than the United Nations used to condemn Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. So I just question the balance of this administration, and I think we have to stick with our position on the settlements, but we need to let these parties make peace and not try to give the impression that we can deliver Israel to the Arab position.
Thanks, Governor. Senator Kerry.
Well, the problem with what the administration has done with the loan guarantees is that it's shook its fist at a friend. Israel is our friend. It's our only really reliable friend in the Middle East, and we should do nothing to jeopardize Israel's security. I think it's quite appropriate for the United States to continue its policy in opposition to the settlements. But to link them to the loan guarantees is to interfere with the negotiation itself and make the negotiation more difficult by provoking the Palestinians and other parties to the negotiation by raising an issue that nobody raised before the United States itself raised it. I, by the way, think the United States of America missed an enormous opportunity at the end of the Gulf War. For gosh sakes, we had just saved Saudi Arabia. Just saved them. We at least, I would assume, could have gotten them to recognize Israel's right to exist and break the secondary boycott. At least we could have gotten the nation whose lives we had just saved to make a bold step to change the dynamic, the political dynamic in the Middle East.
Senator Tsongas?
Well, the fact is that what's going on now is very clear. George Bush has a personality conflict with Prime Minister Shamir. It is personal. And a leader of a great nation should not engage in that kind of behavior. I will not. We're going to deal with this on the issues. If you look back historically, Jackson Vanik was the cornerstone of the American relationship with the Soviet Union. What we said to the Soviets was very clear. Allow the Jews to emigrate and you'll have a relationship with us. If you don't, you will not. Finally, they do when the change comes in the Soviet Union. And they're allowed to emigrate. They go to Israel. We have a responsibility to help settle those people, to give them a place to live. So I think the administration's attitude on loan guarantees has no historical link to what happened previously, which we were part of making happen. And the final point I was making, my solution for the Middle East is very simple. You have to take Israel and Arab states and link them together so they are interwoven. And those links must be economic. So a Middle Eastern common market. So I, as an Israeli, have an interest in the well-being of the Arab states, and I, as an Arab, have a common interest and a self-interest in the survival of Israel. So you link these countries together and not depend that every once in a while there will be an Anwar Sadat. That's not your typical leader. You have to bring these nations together so they are interlinked, interwoven, and the self-interest remains mutual.
Senator Harkin.
I support the loan guarantees because, as has been said before me, we do have a moral obligation under Jackson Vanik. We pushed for years to get the Jews out of the Soviet Union, and now we just can't leave them stranded. And for our government to hold these innocent people hostages to a power play between countries, I think is beneath the dignity of the United States of America. So we do have to provide the loan guarantees. We have an obligation to do that, keeping in mind that in 43 years, Israel has never defaulted on a loan that we've ever given them, never once in 43 years. That can't be said of a lot of other countries. Third thing we have to keep in mind is that in dealing with the Middle East, we have to keep history in mind. It wasn't Israel that invaded the Arab nations. It was the Arab nations that invaded Israel. And we also have to keep in mind we have a little country there the size of Vermont, about 3 million people, surrounded by a landmass half the size of the United States with 200 million people. And it's that big landmass and 200 million people who have vowed to drive that little country off the face of the earth, not the other way around. So I think what we need to do in the Mideast, first of all, is to have something else on the table that's not on the table. We keep putting all the pressure on Israel. Why don't we put the pressure on the Arab nations to have some democratic reforms in their countries? How about a little bit of democracy? A little bit of democracy in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and Syria and Jordan. Democracies don't attack each other, but we've just let that go by the wayside. We got to be putting the pressure on those countries to have democratic reforms, and secondly, putting the pressure on those countries to call off their economic embargo against Israel and recognize its legitimate right to exist. If they would do that, then they could get ahead with the peace process.
Governor Brown.
I've supported and I do support the loan guarantees, but like Mr. Rabin, the head of the Labor Party, who has condemned what he calls political settlements, anyone who doesn't acknowledge the fact that this furious settlement pace is going to undermine the peace process and make any kind of lasting solution impossible is just not facing the facts as they are. And besides that, we have an administration who's already, after saying we have to cut arms sales to the Middle East, has already approved of $6 billion in arms sales to that part of the world, and now wants to come up with 70 F-15s to sell to Saudi Arabia. We need a policy of realism that recognizes that Israel is an ally and a friend, and we stand behind her security and even her military superiority, but at the same time, the people who live in the West Bank and the Gaza, that those are human beings. They have their rights and their interests and their dignity, and we have to respect that. Israel has to respect that. And if we're going to have a peace process that's going to go anywhere, it has to have that capacity to allow for both security of all parties and all people and fairness. That's what I'd like to see, and I think we have a ways before we get there.
All right, let's have our citizen question now, and then we'll come back to Mr. Carroll for more. Heidi Hagenbu, an 8th grader at Clear Lake Middle School in Westminster. And Heidi, your question is directed to Senator Kerry to begin with.
Senator Kerry, here's my question for you. Foreign businesses can obtain permits to operate on public lands. With tensions increasing over trade between the U.S. and other countries, how do you feel about foreign ownership of these lease permits for mining, logging, livestock grazing, and for operating ski areas on our public lands?
I don't like it. I don't, Heidi. I mean, what I see, by the way, is the United States of America at a moment in its history, very much like when World War II was over. And I think we have to be very careful in saying that we don't want foreign companies to come in and buy up our land. I think we have to be very careful in that moment, not to recognize that we're a part of this world. We are a part of this world. And at the end of World War II, our parents, my parents, your grandparents, put together new trading structures, new strategic structures that allowed us not only to live relatively in peace, but to prosper economically as a consequence of trade. We sell $439 billion worth of products outside the United States. That's almost $150 billion worth of payroll that goes to American families as a result of that trade. We have an opportunity today to convert old enemies into new customers, but we're going to need new trading and new strategic structures to get that done. As president, I would bring Japan and the European community together and say, we, in our interest, in our own self-interest, must move to lower trade barriers, must move to lower tariffs, so these less developed countries, the 4 billion people who live in less developed countries, have an opportunity to raise their income. Because unless they raise their income, they're not going to be able to buy products from Americans and create jobs in the United States of America as well.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Tsongas.
That's a disturbing issue, but there are others as well. What's happening in this country is that foreigners have come in to buy a good part of our manufacturing base, golf courses across the country. Now, the reason that's happening is very simple. The United States economy, compared to Japan and Germany, is not doing well. So it's not so much that it's bad that they're coming here. The difficulty is there's no equilibrium here. They are buying us up, we're not buying them up. So the whole focus of my economic plan, the whole strategy of my campaign is to make the manufacturing base of this country viable. So my economic program puts the money into the engine that drives the economy. Manufacturing, manufacturing, manufacturing. Small businesses, large businesses. So there is growth. Small companies can start. Small companies can become medium companies. Medium companies can become larger companies. If we don't do something about our trade deficit and our budget deficit, we are going to be a colony of other countries. And the irony is that Ronald Reagan and George Bush, the so-called fiscal conservatives, gave us a $3 trillion deficit add-on. Washington to Carter, $1 trillion of debt, less than $1 trillion. Bush, Reagan, by themselves, added $3 trillion to that debt. That is the legacy of Reagan-Bush, and we as Democrats have to reverse that, deal with the deficit, deal with the trade imbalance, get our economy moving, invest, 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 and then we won't have to worry about these problems down the road.
Senator Harkin. I hate to keep reminding my good friend Paul Tsongas that manufacturing is not the engine that drives our economy. The engine that drives our economy are people, are human resources. And that's why we've got to put more into early intervention and early childhood education and building education up in this country and guaranteeing that every young person in America has the right to a college education. I just wanted to say that and get that off my chest, because I believe it. That's where we've got to start investing, is in our people, in our human resources, and our government has taken away from that. And Mr. Tsongas says just give more tax breaks to business and somehow that'll help us. We've got, please don't, now you told me once not to interrupt you. When your time comes around, you will be able to respond. You'll have time. Now, to get to your question, I think it is bad that people are coming in and buying up our leaseholds and our property rights. And again, it might surprise you, I do agree with Paul Tsongas a little bit here that we have to build up our own industrial base, reduce our deficit with other countries so that it won't make it so attractive for them. But one thing I do believe we have to do is to find out who's buying what and how much are they buying. A couple of years ago, Johnny Bryant, a congressman from Texas, and I introduced companion bills in the House and Senate just to let the American people know who was buying what, to make people sign in at the door. Who are you? Where are you from? How much are you buying? Where's your money coming from? I believe we American people have a right to know who's buying the businesses and the property in America. We were unsuccessful in getting that bill through because lobbyists for Japan and other countries came in and killed our progress. Well, I'll tell you, as President of the United States, I'm going to get it through and give us a right to know who's buying up America. Governor Brown.
Your real question was about how to use public lands, wasn't it?
No, leasehold.
Leasehold. What kind of respect do we have for the treasure that is our public lands? And do we overexploit them? Do we rip them apart? Or do we respect the grazing capacity and wilderness and the use of water in the public lands of this country? And I believe that we have to use our resources so that they not only return something in this generation, but that remain for generations to come. And whether it's grazing or timber or recreational uses or water, very importantly, we have to understand very precisely what the carrying capacity is. What's a fair return to the people of this state and the people of this country? And then understanding that, acting as good stewards, not just of today or of today's profit, but of a sustainable relationship with our environment. We're turning this planet into a stinking junkyard, and it's up to us to heal and to restore and to make sure those assets that we have inherited are there for all generations to come.
Governor Clinton.
Heidi, you just learned an important lesson about politicians. You ask a real tough question, and when we can't answer it, we give our stock speech. Let me try to answer the question. I believe that every issue you raise, grazing, timber, tourism, ski lodges, Should foreign interests be able to buy up these leaseholds? I think it depends entirely on whether some really bad thing will happen in our country or our long-term economic health and well-being. Does it hurt us or help us to get this foreign money in our country? Now, as a practical matter, it's mostly a good thing when we can get investment from overseas now because of the policies of the last 12 years. Your country has become the world's biggest debtor. In 1980, when Ronald Reagan was elected and told Jimmy Carter he could balance the budget, we were the world's biggest banker. Now we owe more money than anybody in the world. We don't have the money to help the Soviet Union. We don't even have the money to rebuild our own country. So when this money comes in just for leases, not for buying up federal lands, if it doesn't do any harm to our own economy, if in fact it helps us to reinvest in our economy, and as Governor Brown said, if it doesn't hurt the environment, then under these circumstances, even though I don't like it, I think we got to go along with it. But until we have an aggressive, people-oriented economic policy that does both what the Harkin and the Tsongas arguments are, gives business incentive to reinvest in our country again, but puts our people first and recognizes we must first develop the capacities of our people, we're going to keep getting money from overseas because it's the only place the money is now.
Thanks, Governor. Can I respond once on that? I want to respond. I just want to respond.
Do it quickly because
to Governor Clinton's. I think we have a real disagreement here. I am opposed to foreign interests buying up our natural resources. There's no more important right for us as Americans, as citizens of this country, than to hold on to our natural resources and to have our own jurisdiction over our natural resources. I don't want to let that go anywhere else. I'm sorry. I disagree on that.
But if it's a lease,
Senator Tsongas first, and then we'll come back to you, Governor Clinton. Please.
The reason I care so strongly about the manufacturing base is very simple. I grew up in the city, Lowell, Massachusetts. It was a great textile city. And textiles left. And my city went through agony and decline. And human beings that I grew up with did not have a job. I'm for people too, Tom. But you have to give them some place to go so they can make a living and provide for their families. Think of all the GM workers who just got laid off. Think of a GM worker walking into their home and saying to their husband or wife, I don't have a job. And saying to their children, I'm not sure what your future is. We talk about manufacturing and creating jobs. There's a human dimension to it. And our responsibility as Democrats is to provide people a capacity to get a job, provide for their family, give dignity to their children.
We're concerned, Paul.
Do anything for General Motors.
Look, this is an important point.
Go ahead,
Paul, you are from Lowell, Massachusetts. There's no question about that, and you understand manufacturing in New Hampshire. What gives me pause is whether or not you understand agriculture and Western interest. You voted against sugar when you were in the United States Senate. How do you feel people in eastern Colorado and western Nebraska feel? Their jobs are on the line. That's a manufacturing base here in the West. And I get concerned. Yes, I think you understand manufacturing in New Hampshire very well. But I really am genuinely not concerned.
Are we not? We're ranging over the whole landscape out there.
Of course we are.
All right.
We are ranging over the landscape.
Let's go on.
There are lives at stake, and it seems to me it's a very important issue. You jumped in and asserted again that you understand manufacturing. I believe you do.
Senator, you made that point. Thanks very much. We're going to move on to the next question. We're going to cut your responses to a minute because we're running out of time in this segment. Mr. Carroll.
Let's stick with trade for a second. Senator, you've spoken of the need for the Japanese to open up their markets to American exports. In fact, in a debate in New Hampshire, you said you might go on the air if they didn't and urge Americans not to buy Japanese products. Yet the United States maintains high tariffs and barriers on hundreds of items from dozens of countries. As president, would you seek to lower tariffs on such items as oranges, sugar, and other agricultural products in order to give the consumer a break?
The fact is that what is in place now, I would allow to remain in place. Now, we talked about what happened in New Hampshire. The fact is, Bob, that you put an ad on television in New Hampshire, which you're not running here, that talked about Japan. I challenge you, put that ad on television here in Colorado.
It's a lousy ad. I'm not going to put it back. Why would I want to put something on the air that didn't work?
The issue is not whether it worked. The issue is what you believe in. And your belief should not change because the ad did not work.
Let me tell you, Paul, the Japanese have protected their marketplace, and that's what that ad said.
Finish my point.
Go ahead, Senator Tsongas.
The fact is that protectionism was a very handy issue to use in the East. But the fact is, the further west you come, and particularly when you get to the West Coast, It's a very dangerous precedent, because the fact is that the farmers in this state increasingly rely upon export for their products. And the more you have an enclosing world where markets begin to close to each other, the worse it's going to be for people in this part of the country and on the West Coast. I'm simply saying, if you make one argument on the East Coast, bring it with your baggage to the rest of the country.
Senator Harkin.
I want to correct one thing on the record here, though, Paul. Twice during your Senate career in the Senate, you voted against sugar interest and sugar price supports. And I'll tell you, that could devastate us in the western part of the United States. And what's happening now with the GATT agreements going on in Europe, they're going to try to cut about 20% of the income from our sugar beet farmers and sugar growers here in America again. You voted against sugar price supports before, so I assume you'll still be consistent in that. Secondly, we do have to keep in mind not just specific articles, but do we have a balance of trade? I pointed out a few weeks ago that in downtown Tokyo, the price of sirloin steak was $26 a pound. Our people we can get steak over there for less than $5 a pound. Why can't we? They got the doors closed. For the next 10 years, Japan is going to spend over $3 trillion on infrastructure. A lot of that's going to require wood. They'll buy our raw logs, but they won't buy our finished timber, our finished lumber. They won't buy plywood and finished 2x4s, 4x6s, things like that. I would, as president, go to Japan and say, you're going to open your doors to our products, or you may not be able to sell as many cars in the United States.
Governor Brown.
Well, I don't think that Senator Tsongas's limited capital gains is going to do much for General Motors, people being laid off. I don't think it might do something, but not for General Motors. Beyond that, though, let's not be naive about foreign traders, whether they're Japanese or Korean or Chinese. These people are very focused. They come from ancient cultures. They're very clever in strategy. In fact, these people wrote the book on strategy. Then people in the West, thousands of years later, began to pick up on some of the same techniques. So don't be naive. I think we have to be willing to fight back in appropriate circumstances. But I also believe if you don't make a decent car, you don't make a decent product, you shouldn't ask the government to bail you out. So the real answer is make high-quality products, make a car, make semiconductors, make computers that other people, whether they're Japanese or anyone else, want to stand in line to buy. And I think our American workers can do that if they have the right kind of leadership and you put the right kind of tax code in place, and that's what I think a 13% flat value-added tax will do to stimulate this economy, the stock market, and our ability to compete.
Thank you. Governor Clinton.
Let me answer the specific question first on agricultural products. Almost all of our agricultural barriers are put up in response to what others do. Particularly with regard to citrus, we have far higher environmental standards than many of those who would flood our market with citrus products. So no, I wouldn't remove the barriers unilaterally and expose our farmers anywhere to unfair competition. I just wouldn't do it. If you want to negotiate it down, fine. Now let's deal with the larger issue. I disagree with Senator Tsongas's approach. The Japanese, our trade representative, says there are $10 billion worth of sales, 300,000 jobs that could be created tomorrow in Japan if they were as open to our products as we are to theirs. If they wouldn't change, I wouldn't go on television and beg the American people not to buy the products. I would use the legal, existing, appropriate authority of the president to retaliate. I would also tell you, General Motors is not in trouble today because they didn't have a capital gains tax. It was lowered 4 times between 78 and 86. They got everything they wanted, and instead of reinvesting in this country and reorganizing the workforce and retraining the workers, they took big executive pay and gave up market share and kept the price of cars high. That's why they lost their market, and we better understand it.
Senator Kerry.
Well, I mean, I would negotiate anything in a multilateral fashion. I mean, in fact, as I answered Heidi's question earlier, my intent would be to bring the Japanese and the European community together and say, I don't think the general agreement in tariff and trade is working, the old structure that we put together after World War II. It is in our interest to lower tariff and trade barriers. And the United States has led in that regard. And I appreciate that people think that General Motors and Ford and Chrysler are at fault. But I'll guarantee you that's not how they feel in Ypsilanti, Michigan. The fact of the matter is Japan protects its marketplace. Their top 10 exports to the United States of America represent about $52 billion. Every single one of them are products that produce high wages in their country. They allow us to sell into their country, relatively unrestricted, those things that produce low wages in our nation. Yes, I'll go after the Japanese as President of the United States of America, not for the purpose of protecting American marketplaces, Not for the purpose of simply protecting us, but for the purpose of saying, for us to sustain economic growth in America, we need to stand up for the American worker. We need to stand up as well for fair trade on this world. And if we get fair trade, not only will we be profitable, but our people will have high-paying jobs.
Thanks, Senator. Thanks to our second panelist, it's time to take another break. We told our candidates that they would be getting some free-for-all time, and we're going to go to our third segment. We'll ask a couple of questions, and then we'll find out what's on the candidates' mind. We'll be back in just a minute.
This is C-SPAN coverage of a debate from Denver, Colorado, featuring the leading Democratic presidential candidates. This event is coming to us courtesy of television station KUSA-TV Channel 9 and the Rocky Mountain News, both in Denver. C-SPAN is bringing you this event as it is being shown to Colorado voters over Channel 9 in Denver, and while they're showing you some commercials, we will talk about what's coming up here on C-SPAN. By the way, if you have missed part of this debate, you would like to see it in its entirety, C-SPAN will run this again at 6:25 a.m. Eastern Time early tomorrow morning. That's 3:25 a.m. if you're on the West Coast. On Tuesday, Colorado voters will go to the polls to take part in that state's first presidential primary. There are some 530,000 registered Democratic voters. 47 delegates are at stake. This is part of an effort by several western states to try and attract the attention of the presidential candidates earlier in the process this year than they have in the past. A number of states are holding primaries and caucuses earlier in the calendar than they usually do. Also on Tuesday, along with the Colorado primary, Washington State will hold a caucus. Then Utah, Idaho, and Minnesota will hold party caucuses also on Tuesday. On March 7th, Arizona and Wyoming will convene their caucuses, and on March 8th, Democrats in Nevada will caucus to pick their delegates for the 1992 Democratic National Convention and for these candidates. A few moments ago, the candidates were discussing economics and job creation policy. More than half of Colorado is farmland, and about 60% of its workforce is considered to be white-collar. Colorado, Georgia, Maryland holding their presidential primaries on Tuesday, and the state of Idaho will hold Democratic caucuses also, and you'll see much of this coming up on C-SPAN. We invite you to stay with C-SPAN for more Election 92 coverage. After this debate, we will follow President Bush and Patrick Buchanan on the campaign trail, and then you will see campaign appearances by Democrats Tom Harkin and Bob Kerrey. And then later at 12:45 a.m., it's coverage of a panel discussion on presidential candidates and their campaign advisors. We're going to take you back to Denver, Colorado now, and Channel 9 for this 1992 Democratic Candidates Forum from the Auditorium Theater.
Our third and last segment of our Democratic Candidates Forum. Our third panelists are Jennifer Romm, political reporter for 9 KUSA, and Joan Lowy, Washington correspondent for the Rocky Mountain News. Joan Lowy has the first question for Senator Harkin.
Senator, welcome to Denver. There has been a lot of talk about electability in this campaign. No Democratic presidential candidate has carried Colorado or the Rocky Mountain West in a general election since 1964. Tell us why you think you are more electable in Colorado and the West than your competitors or President Bush.
First of all, I have a long history of beating Republicans in Republican areas. For 17 years in Iowa, a state that's 60% Republican and independent, I've been winning elections, first to the House and the Senate. I was one of only 2 Democrats in Reagan landslide year in 1984 to beat incumbent Republicans. I was the first Democrat ever reelected in the United States Senate in Iowa in 1990. Plus, for 17 years, I've served on the committees that are relevant to the West. I know the West. I spent a lot of my youth growing up in Wyoming. That's the state north of here. I understand the West. And when you talk about things like grazing fees and increasing them, I fought against those. You talk about the sugar program, I fought hard to keep the sugar program. When you talk about jobs in the West, construction jobs, things that put people to work here, I fought for those. You talk about Colorado specific, I've worked to get things for Colorado. Let me just tell you a little story. A few years ago, we knew that the big airport being built out here needed $500 million from the federal government, that commitment, to get going. It came down to one committee vote in the Transportation Appropriations Committee when we met with the House side. And it was tough. We had powerful forces working against us. Even Frank Lorenzo was trying to scuttle the whole idea. Colorado did not have a voting member on that committee, but they had me. And I stuck in there. And you can ask anyone that was in that room that night. I was the one that hung in there for the airport in Colorado. I was the person that stuck in there and fought because I knew how important it was to Colorado.
Governor Brown.
And we got it now.
How do you win Colorado is the same way you win the whole country. Half the people are not voting because they think they're getting ripped off, lied to, and they think the political system is totally out of control. The whole basis of my campaign is to reach out and bring in millions of new people. That's the reason why I did as well as I did in Maine, because thousands of people who had never gone to a caucus came in and voted for what we call a We the People campaign. And the experts in the Washington media said, you can't run a campaign on no more than $100 from any one person, but we have. And we have because we think the system is corrupt. It's no longer serving the American people. That's how we're going to win Colorado. This is a reform state. It's a sunshine laws, term limits. This is a state that cares not only about political integrity and change, but also about the environment. I have an environmental record second to none. Look at what the League of California Voters says. Look at what the World Watch Institute says, that California is the window on the world in terms of alternative energy because of what we did in the late 70s. I believe Colorado can be won by someone who's committed to a simplification of the tax code, a strong environmental record, and cleaning up what I consider to be this cancerous corruption of political action money, and just as bad, the domination of $1,000 donors in the whole political process. This isn't about people in this audience. It's about bundling together $1,000 checks to flood the media with often deceptive commercials. That's what I want to change, and I believe the people of Colorado agree with that.
Governor Clinton.
I think I can win in Colorado because of my personal experience with this state, because of my track record, and because of the message I bring to the American people. I've probably spent more time in Colorado in the last 10 or 12 years than any state outside my own, with maybe one exception. I spent a lot of time here as a governor, as a tourist, as a friend. I understand the issues of the West and the issues of Colorado. I know how important it is to plan for the transition from a defense to a domestic economy, to deal with these water issues in a sensitive and fair way, to deal with issues like the Denver airport and the old Denver airport and what's going to happen to it. I also believe that my track record, being a real outsider in the 80s, the only governor to have served during the whole decade on the receiving end of the Reagan-Bush revolution, trying to create change with a base of progressive Democrats, minorities, and change-oriented Republican and independent people who believed in the future. And finally, I've got a message that goes beyond the brain-dead politics of both parties in Washington that says we've got to do both. Give people incentives to invest in our economy, but don't give them something for nothing anymore like we did in the 80s. And let's put our people first. Let's give them the capacity and the power to change and to win with change. Whether it's working women and working mothers or students or little children, I have a record of education and economic development second to none, and a message that will really take this country in a new direction.
Senator Kerry.
Well, first of all, I don't pick up my ideas about the West and Sheplers. And secondly, I have cast some votes in the Appropriations Committee for Colorado projects, so I must confess I did it because Tim Wirth and Roy Romer asked me to do it. And I understand the West. I understand that Colorado needs economic and educational renewal. I understand that Colorado wants to develop high technology industries. I understand that Colorado depends upon resource-based agriculture, tourism, and the development of our wilderness and the protection of the quality of the environment that we've got in the West. I understand that states should have the authority over water. I understand as well that the people of Colorado are apt to be just like the people everywhere else in the country. They're concerned about their children. They're concerned about homelessness. They're concerned about poverty. They do want national health insurance as a beginning of economic change. They understand that American families, that Colorado families, are in the economic fight of their lives, and they want to shake this government to its foundation and reorient the priorities of this federal government, not just to support the families in Colorado, but to support every family in the United States of America.
Senator Tsongas.
I think you can beat George Bush in Colorado if you present to people a vision, conviction, beliefs. They have a feel for what you're talking about. The fact is, in the Channel 7 poll that was released yesterday, I beat George Bush by 9 points. That is 14 points better than any other person up here on this panel. Why? Because I can reach out to women's groups because of my position on choice and other things and be endorsed by women's groups. I can be endorsed by environmental groups because of my work on solar, on the Alaska Lands Bill. I'm pro-gay rights. I filed the first gay rights bill. Neither of the two senators here have endorsed it. So on social issues, I've been there, and I'm committed, and that will not go away. But in New Hampshire, I not only came in first among Democrats and independents, I came in third in the Republican primary. 3,600 Republicans in New Hampshire who could have voted for the president or Pat Buchanan took the trouble, at no instigation on our part, to write my name in. Why? Economic hope. I tell the economic truth. I'm not Santa Claus. I'm not for all these tax breaks or giveaways. I can grow this economy. So I've avoided all the easy answers. I'm going to grow this economy by taking our capital and investing in manufacturing. You've heard me say that before. To grow this economy. And Republicans who are moderate on social issues look to a Democrat who's not an ATM Democrat. ATM Democrat, just push the buttons and magically the money comes out?
Senator,
we have to put the money in on the other side. That's why we can do it.
Jennifer Rahm, a question starting with Governor Brown.
Governor, nuclear waste is an important issue in Colorado communities like Denver, yet the federal government has been unable to open permanent disposal sites in New Mexico and Nevada. What would you do to resolve that problem?
Well, I wish somebody did know how to resolve that problem. The fact is they don't. When I was governor of California, I signed a bill that said no nuclear power plant can ever be built until the federal government certifies a permanent, safe disposal site. They haven't done that yet. Doesn't exist. All we can do is keep it where it's produced. Those who benefit from nuclear power are going to have to pay with being next to those nuclear power reactors and the waste that'll store there. Keep it there. And then have all the scientists we can put on the task figure out what to do with it. Can we store it? Can we recycle it? That's why I want to stop nuclear power now. I want to phase it out. There isn't an answer to waste. You see, that's the immorality. That's the short-sightedness, that this radioactive waste that is lethal, that is dangerous, that will last for thousands of years, is piling up every minute. And until this country stands up and says, no, we're going to phase it out, as I've committed to do over the next 10 years, and embarks upon an energy plan that makes us truly independent and sustainable, then we're going to be just wondering, what will we do? I think we have to put our best scientists to work, get Japanese and Europeans and all the rest, because this is a worldwide crisis that has no answer as of this moment, and that's the best argument for saying no to nuclear power. Phase it out as quickly as we can and come up with the alternatives to sustain our economy.
Governor Clinton.
The only difference I have with Governor Brown on this issue is how quickly you can phase it out. That is, I think if the plants are operating safely, we don't have the energy substitutes now just to shut them down. But he's absolutely right. I mean, the people in Nevada and New Mexico feel that they've been singled out for a problem that no one knows the answer to. It is unfair. We need to take some of this money we've been spending on high technology defense work as we build down the defense budget and put our best minds to work on what to do with nuclear waste. In the meanwhile, we need an alternative energy policy that relies on more natural gas, more renewable resources, the invigoration of the SERI laboratory here in Colorado, and reaching international levels of energy conservation and much higher fuel efficiency in automobiles to become more energy independent. We do not need to do what Senator Tsongas wants to do and build hundreds of more nuclear plants to become energy independent. One of the reasons he's ahead in the polls is that people don't know what he stands for.
That is a lie. That is a lie.
Well, that's what Time Magazine says.
He said it's reasonable.
We'll beg your indulgence and we'll go out of order here for just a minute. Go ahead,
You don't want to build any more
Senator
nuclear
Tsongas.
power plants? Come, say you don't, then. Let's get you on record for the first time. Say it. Just say no. Just say no. It's
All right,
easy.
let's give him a chance to respond. Senator
Let me
Tsongas, then we'll
finish.
come back to Senator Kerry.
You put an ad on Colorado today. The Rocky Mountain News, and when they analyzed your ad, it said it was misleading. And you're doing this again tonight. Okay? I have said repeatedly, no more nuclear power plants of this generation. No more. None.
Of this
Well,
generation, tell them now.
Let me finish. What I have said, and today there was an op-ed piece by Jessica Tuckman Matthews, Vice President of the World Resources Institute. What I have said is we have to keep the nuclear research going so it remains an option. Okay? Let me read. This is not somebody you can argue with. No one can be sure.
No one can argue with you, Paul. You're always perfect.
I'm not perfect, but I'm honest. Okay?
All right, wait, whoa. All right, wait a minute. Wait a minute. All right. Let me say.
Hold on.
You read the article. You read the article, and then we'll talk about honest. You read the article, we'll talk about honest.
Let me read this article. No one can be sure that conservation will prove to be as large an energy source as it now seems, or whether greenhouse warming. I chaired the first hearings on the greenhouse effect. I think it's real. I take it very seriously. Whether global warming may rule out new coal plants. Paul Tsongas need not apologize to anyone for recognizing that when uncertainty is the name of the game, the only wise course is to keep options open. This is the Vice President of the World Resources Institute, a leading institute trying to bring about conservation and environmental protection.
Senator Kerry.
You got to give me a chance to answer that.
All right,
before
we'll
we're
come
over.
back
Go
to you.
ahead. No,
Go ahead.
Of course we'll give you a chance. We'll give
Go
you a
next.
chance.
Go,
You'll
Bob.
get a chance. Well, Paul, first I appreciate you're not Santa Claus, but you're beginning to sound like the Grinch that stole Christmas over there. Look, the problem that we've got with nuclear waste is a rather simple one. The Department of Energy has been lying to the American people. Our own government has been lying to the American people. And to the people of Nevada that are terrified about this site, I would say this: no more lies. We'll do a study of the site. If it's concluded that the site is dangerous and environmentally a threat, we'll shut it down. We're not going to build a site and store high-level waste in an area that's a danger to the people living in the area. And we're going to provide the people that have been selected with every piece of information that we can. That's the reason that American people are beginning to distrust their government. The government's been lying to them and not been telling them the truth. I mean, I believe in the area of energy that there's a tremendous amount of jobs that we can create in this country if we'll focus on efficiency. We saved $150 billion. The American people did. Not our government, not our federal government, but the American people did. From 1973, when the oil embargo was placed, until Ronald Reagan did a reversal and said no more energy efficiency. Over the next 8 years, we can save another $160 billion, put dollars in the pockets of American families, profit to the bottom line of American business, create jobs in this country, and allow us to say that we've just fought our last war for cheap oil.
Thanks. Thanks, Senator. Did you want a quick
Don't
response?
you want everybody?
Very quick.
Everyone should answer the question first, I think.
Okay.
Does everybody answer the question?
I think everybody has, yes.
No, Senator Tsongas hasn't answered.
All right, go ahead, Senator.
Mr. Harkin. Senator
Harkin
Harkin
has
has Senator Harkin.
I think Tom as well. Let me say the problem with what is happening now is that the people doing the studies are government people. So they have a self-interest in some outcome, and they're not credible. What I would do is I would go to the National Academy of Sciences and give them the issue. No one would dispute their credibility or their distance from the issue, and give them the report, tell them to do the study, and in essence sign on to what they come up with. You need to have a credible third party to do the study. Let me say about energy policy. I put the first solar energy amendment in the Congress back in the 70s. A lot of talk here about conservation of renewables. I was doing it a long, long time ago. I was the Solar Energy Institute's Man of the Year in 1982. I put $1 billion through the authorization, unfortunately not the appropriations, for conservation and solar energy. So I've been there on conservation, I've been there on solar. My view is maximize conservation, maximize solar, maximize the use of natural gas because it is most benign of the fossil fuels. Then pick your poison. Look at oil. $50 billion a year we ship over to other countries because we're oil dependent. Nuclear, we just heard the arguments against it. Coal, global warming. Global warming is a very serious issue. Its impact potentially on this world is extraordinary. I'm not going to belittle it. Global warming to me is the great threat along with world population. I will do nothing to increase global warming in this world.
Senator Harkin.
Well, Paul, you may be honest, but I think you've been a little disingenuous here with this crowd on your answer on nuclear energy. Just a little disingenuous. You are on record, and it's provable, as saying that we got to keep the nuclear option open and build smaller nuclear power plants. I'm sorry, that is a fact. You can't escape it. And you've said before that the reason we have to do that is because we don't want to go to war again for oil. But I don't agree with either one of those options. I don't think either one of those options confront us. What I say we have to do is to have new kind of leadership in this country, moving us in a new direction. Yes, we have to utilize more natural gas in this country. It cleans burner. Tim Worth has a car driving on natural gas. That's the kind of things we ought to be doing. Promoting natural gas use in this country. Burns cleaner. We ought to provide for renewable energy sources. We ought to provide for more ethanol in this country. The Worth-Wilson Amendment, which I voted for and supported, which would have tripled the amount of ethanol produced in this country. Clean burning. Get us off the oil pipeline. Again, I wish we'd have had some help from Senator Kerry on that. He voted against it. I've repeatedly pointed that out as a little misstep on his part in the energy program. And then I think we need to move ahead in energy efficiency and conservation, but also we need to start a new path in America, and what I call solar hydrogen. Using solar energy to make hydrogen. It's going to take about 25 years, but we ought to start on it right now. Because when we do that and you burn hydrogen, you get water, and it's the perfect cycle. That's what we ought to be looking forward. Not war on oil, not nuclear power, but a whole new renewable energy future for America.
Thank you, Senator. We have a little bit more. Go ahead, quickly.
Answer this attack on my candor. Every one of these debates, Senator Tsongas has been reading to the rest of us, and we have never done that. But the implication, if it's printed, it's true. Now, here's a Time magazine, March 2nd. One area particularly in which Tsongas would have the government take a leading role is in the creation of nuclear power plants. Tsongas calls for building 300 to 500 megawatt plants rather than the current 1,200 megawatt models. Now, I didn't lie, and maybe he thinks the Time magazine author lied, but since we have a presumption that the printed word is always true in these debates with Senator Tsongas, I'm quoting from it. Let me say one other thing. The first untrue negative ad in this campaign was run against Bob Kerrey and Bill Clinton by Paul Tsongas, who ran an ad saying that we were for a middle-class tax cut to increase the deficit of the United States, when both of us called for an increase in the incomes and the taxes of people who were upper-income people whose taxes went down in the 1980s. That was the first negative ad in South Dakota and Georgia. Who knows where else it ran? And it wasn't true then, and it's not true now.
All right, we're into Hold on, we'll get to it.
I'd like to chance it.
We're into free-for-all time here, and we're going to let Senator...
He didn't get the answer.
Yeah, he did. Well, if we're in the free-for-all... Yeah, I'd like to say... I'd like to try to...
Wait a minute.
I would like a chance to respond if I can.
We're going to start. We're going to start with Senator Tsongas. Let's do this in TV sound bites, okay? Around 30 seconds per answer. If you want to talk, raise your hand, and we'll just use up the last 5 minutes that we have. Go right ahead.
First of all, the Time magazine story, they never talk with us. It's going to be in this coming week, number one. Number two, Rocky Mountain News, evaluating the ad. Evaluating the Clinton ad, quote, misleading. Number three, I take a pledge. Let's all agree. No ads, no attacking each other, no ads against each other. You know, come on.
What about your
Let me
ad?
finish.
What about your ad, Senator?
You take
What
your
about your
ads
ad?
off. I started yesterday because you've been on my back for a long time. Put your hand up. Oh, put your hand up, Bill. No negative ads. Put your hand up.
Governor Brown.
Listen, put your hand up.
Let him go now.
Hey, if we're going to take a pledge, Paul, I'd like you to tell us who are the $1,000 contributors who are giving you all the money to buy all those ads.
Don't
You know,
debate the
hand
issue.
here.
Put up your hand.
Senator Kerry, go ahead.
Well, wait, you know, this is an interesting point.
Oh, we thought you were through.
Yeah, no, I'm not through. This is real, very to the point. You notice how everyone gets excited when we talk about political ads? That's the bankruptcy of this whole political process. You have to go. What happens is you have to go to people who can give you hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy the ads, and then you become a serious candidate.
Reverse that,
That's
Governor.
well,
How are we going to reverse
you don't allow any contribution more than $100. You get an 800 number, and you say, call in. Yeah.
Senator Kerry.
And you allow people, the point of this feared 800 number is to access power without having to go to the top 1% who are controlling these candidates and manipulating the American people. That's why we, the people, fight against
Senator Kerry.
Well, look, I mean, the regrettable part about all this is it's a rather interesting debate, but, you know, Americans are afraid in record numbers that this might be the year that they lose their job. There's perhaps never been more economic uncertainty in the United States of America than there is right now. And the principal reason is, unfortunately, we all too often get in these debates, we run out of gas, and then we forget why we came in the first place. Now, I'm running for President of the United States of America because I want to take the extraordinary power of this office and use it to do good in America, to create jobs, to clean up our streets. We don't have to have 16,000 drug murders in America. We don't have to look all around this planet for a war to fight. We've got one to fight right here at home. And I intend to use the power. I intend to use that power to do good right here at home.
Senator Harkin, do you feel, this is kind of a zinger, but do you feel at all guilty about being in the Senate with all of the criticism that's coming from the public toward the Washington establishment, and how do you defend that?
Defend what?
The idea that so much of the American public is disenchanted with the system, and you're an integral part of that system.
Jerry Brown makes a lot of that. He says he's been out of government, he's the outsider, and perhaps I'm the insider. Well, Jerry, I got to tell you, Paul's done a little bit of that too. I got to tell you, the question's not inside or outside. The question is, whose side are you on? That's the real question. And the real question, I think, for Coloradans this Tuesday coming up, when you go to the polls, is who among us has the experience and the judgment and the maturity and the calmness and determination of character to take a Democratic message to this country, to take George Bush head on as a proud Democrat, not a warmed-over Republican, not Tweedledee, Tweedledum, but I mean a proud Democrat. Take our democratic values right at George Bush. And who has stuck up for you for 17 years? Who? Ask the question. When the chips are down in Washington, D.C., behind the closed doors and the rich and the powerful are gathered and the special interests, the decisions made, the deals cut, who sticks up for you?
Thank you.
My record is there of sticking up for working people and women and minorities for 17 straight years.
Thank you. We're out of time. We want to say thank you to all of the candidates for coming to Denver and to Colorado and to being part of our forum. Thanks to our panelists. Thanks to our audience here in the Auditorium Theater. And thank you to all of you at home. Thank you and good night.
If you'd like a transcript of tonight's program, send $5 to Journal Graphics, 1535 Grant Street, Denver, Colorado 80203, or call 303-831-9000 to order by credit card.